Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my top 10 favorite fantasy books that were published in 2021. And I've said so many times on my channel that I consider myself, in terms of SFF, first and foremost a science fiction reader. So I was really surprised when I realized that I'd read enough 2021 fantasy in order to do a list like this, because I read enough not only to have 10 books to talk about, but 10 really great books that I do recommend. Some of these books are going to be later into series, but as always with these kind of videos, I'm going to keep them spoiler free so you can absolutely keep watching and hopefully get some good recommendations for series and standalones that you can pick up in the coming year. All that being said, let's get started. So starting at number 10, we actually have two books to talk about, and that is The Mask of Mirrors as well as The Liar's Knot, both by M.A. Carrick, and these are the first two books in the Rook and Rose trilogy. And it's actually really unique that both books came out this year and I got the chance to read them. This is a fantasy of manners that is full of intrigue and deception and plotting. It's very quiet in a lot of ways. There isn't a lot of overt action. Instead, it's all very tense because there are people pretending to be other people, trying to gain favor and access and money. And the story itself is very addictive. I've got to say, it's got tons of characters and places and names, and it was a lot to take in the first time. So while this is at number 10 at the moment, I would say that if I were to reread this series, I suspect it would be even higher up on my list because it is such an addictive quality to it, and it's just a world that you can just get immersed in. Really cool magic system, and definitely one that is worth returning to. Next up at number 9, we have The Shadow of Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first book in a new trilogy series that is inspired by Norse mythology. And it's a multi-POV story, and for me, this book got on the list because I fell in love with the one perspective of Orca. She is a mother and her son is potentially in danger in this book, and so she has to go and save him. And so I love that it's a very female-centric story with a very truly strong female character at the center of the story. She is so relatable, the story is filled with humor, and it's just, again, that Norse style that I've really come to enjoy. And so if you like Viking style stories, this is definitely one to check out. It's gotten so much love this year, and I know it's going to be a lot higher on other people's lists, but for me, I'm putting it here at number 9. Then at number 8, we have A Heart Divided by Jin Young, and this is the fourth and final book in the Heroes of Condor quartet. I'm going to just briefly talk about this one because I did mention it in my backlist video, but essentially it is a translated Chinese story that is a historical fantasy and involves romance and action, specifically kung fu fighting, which made it feel like reading a kung fu movie. It was so much fun, the characters are great, and I really did fall in love with it. I think it would have been higher up on my list if the ending had been a little bit more epic, but because I understand that there's a follow-up series, so there's more to come, it kind of makes sense why it just felt like another entry in the story. But it has some good puzzles and math, and the humor is just spot on, and I really enjoy this series a lot. So yes, I had to gush about it once more. Next, at number 7, we have Son of the Storm, which is the first book in a new epic fantasy series. And this is a story told from multiple points of view, including a young man who is studying and comes across this young woman who appears to have magical abilities that she should not have. This magic is forbidden or simply just should not exist. And so their stories get tangled up together. This is definitely a setup for a longer series, so my feelings about this book will largely depend on what comes in the following books, but in terms of a setup, it was a really good start. I was especially intrigued by the world building. I thought it was fascinating. You have different cultural aspects being brought in. It's an own voices story with an African-inspired fantasy world, and within there, depending on people's shade of their skin tone, it reflects on their worth or status within society. And I just thought this was fascinating. And I've said before, but this is perhaps the first fantasy series that actually made me want to go and look at the maps at the beginning, because normally I kind of skip over those, I know, unpopular opinion, but the world was so fascinating that I just had to get a picture of where it was all taking place. And again, it's one that I will probably love even more once the next books are published in the series. I can't wait to get back to the world. Then at number 6, we have The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. This is the second book in the Droning Empire trilogy. And this is a series that at the beginning in the first book, it follows a young woman named Lynn, who is the daughter to the emperor, and she has lost her memory. She is trying to regain it. There is a really cool magic system that involves bone shards, where people take the shards of the citizens of the land and use them to make these constructs, but in doing so, it drains their life energy. And the magic itself is kind of like coding, so it's very practical and hard, which I always really enjoy. And within the story, as I mentioned, there's a really good mystery element to it, because this girl does not remember what has happened, and so she's trying to puzzle together, knowing that her father is not saying everything that is actually going on. We also get the perspective of a lovable smuggler who is really quite this softy character. There's an animal companion, and so much I love. If I was talking about the first book, which was published prior to 2021, it would probably even higher up on my list because I really love the debut. The second novel was definitely a solid entry, but the romance is the only thing that held it down from being inside my top 5. And I'm very eager to see how the series is going to wrap up, because it definitely has favorite potential for me. Then moving into the top 5, we have The Helm of Midnight by Marina J. Lostatter. This is the first book in a new dark fantasy series. It all takes place within this city. It's told over multiple points of view, and it's basically a story about a serial killer. He has been killed off, but his mask that allowed him, or had his powers kind of imbued into them in order to allow other people to take over, has disappeared, and murders have started to happen again. And this is definitely a story that appealed to me because, as you probably know if you watch my channel, I tend to enjoy a lot of horror and thrillers. So a serial killer fantasy story sounded right up my alley, and this one definitely delivered. If it was actually darker, I probably would have it even higher on my list, but for a serial killer story, I found it to be pretty tame, but it had some good twists and turns. I really like the magic. The idea of being able to imbue objects with emotions was a really interesting concept, and I just really want to see where the story goes because, again, there were some good twists, so I want to see how the author is going to build on the ideas introduced in this book. Definitely recommend this one. Then at number 4, we have 7 Deaths of an Empire by G.R. Matthews, and this is currently a standalone, but I could certainly see it being spun into a series. In this book, you follow a few different characters. The setup is that right at the beginning of the story, the emperor has died, and so the story follows a few different people that are trying to make sure that the proper person comes to the throne. And so the one person is at the capital trying to keep everything under control, and then there's also a perspective of a magical user who is trying to bring back an object that is required in order for the throne again to pass to the rightful heir. This is a book that I will say will appeal to those of you that love stories in the vein of A Song of Ice and Fire, specifically the fighting over the throne part. This book is heavy with political intrigue. You don't know who to trust. People are planning and just trying to push their own agenda, and there's some really good twists and turns. I inhaled this book. I thought it was so much fun, and again, it's just one book right now. It definitely reads like a complete story with some really good jaw-dropping moments. I enjoyed the magic system. It was easy to follow, easy to get into, and just a really enjoyable surprise this year. Definitely one I would love to see more people picking up. Then at number 3, we have The Veiled Throne by Ken Liu, the third book in the Dandelion Dynasty series, which I believe will be a quartet. And this is a Chinese fantasy-inspired series that is largely based off of true history, but of course is spun into a secondary world. And it's a story that starts out with different characters trying to vie for the throne, and then the story in these later books is what comes after. I don't want to give away any spoilers. I will say that Ken Liu is an amazing writer. His storytelling is so fascinating. I love spending time with the characters who were so well developed. This book did start out a little bit slow, but as it went, I got more and more back into the story, and I really did fall in love with it. There's an element to this third book that I did not expect to be in there. It was so fun. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. You just have to experience it. And it was just such a surprise and really out of left field, but it just made me love this book even more. So if that doesn't tease you to check out the series and continue on to the third book, I definitely hope you do. Obviously, I'm dying to get my hands on the 4th book, which should be coming out early in 2022. Then at number 2, we have Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, which is the third and final book in her Green Bone Saga trilogy. And this is a story that involves a family war. It's a bit of a mafia-style story between warring clans in this urban fantasy secondary world where there is a substance called jade that enhances people's martial abilities. And we follow this group of characters, specifically this family, as they are trying to gain power. There are twists and turns and heartbreak and death, and you don't know who is going to live and who is going to die. And it's just this beautiful family generational story. And I will say that I went to this book with huge expectations and perhaps impossibly hard to meet, but this book definitely delivered a lot of what I was looking for. I love spending more time with the characters. There was some good twists and turns, some really emotional moments that definitely hit me in the feels, or at least the feels if I had any. I'm a little bit of a cold-hearted reader, but I really enjoyed this final book, and for the most part it met my expectations, and I love the series as a whole. Highly recommend it. It's so much fun. And again, I do not like or read urban fantasy. This is the kind of urban fantasy that will appeal to those of you like myself that prefer epic fantasy, because the story is so epic in scale. It is so exciting. The world building is amazing. I love learning more about the jade, the economics, the politics, the culture. It was just so rich, and I cannot wait to reread the series again and again. Highly recommend. And finally, at the number 1 spot for fantasy published in 2021, we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And this is a story inspired once again by ancient China. We follow a young girl who has been given the prophecy that her life will lead to nothing. Her brother instead has been given this great prophecy. Right at the beginning of the story, however, something happens and her brother dies, and so she takes on his identity and goes on to live the life that he was supposed to live. And so this is very much a story that people kind of describe as like Mulan, where someone goes undercover, switching or hiding their gender in order to get ahead in a society where women really had no status. This story is absolutely brutal what comes of it, and is also very much a war story. So in the later part of the story, it moves on to other characters and you get a larger story that progresses. And this book gave me so many feels. It definitely has similarities to something like the Poppy War, which wrapped up last year, and I've been looking for a read-alike since then. And I just love this book. I read it and liked it, and then I read it again and loved it even more. And I'm so excited to see what is going to come next within this series. I hope it's a long-running series. I haven't had that confirmed yet, but I'm dying for the next book. And until then, I would definitely recommend that everyone catches up, because again, if you love Asian-inspired fantasy like I do, as you can probably tell from this list, then this is one of the best ones. It's one of the best debuts I've read all year, regardless of genre. And yeah, there's no doubt that it definitely earned the number 1 spot on this list, despite having a lot of heavy hitters and fantastic authors competing for that spot. So that is it. We've made it to the end of the video here. As always, let me know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out in the coming year? And I would also love to hear from you. What is your favorite fantasy that was published in 2021 that you got a chance to read? I would love to check it out if it's not already featured on this list. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult fantasy as well as science fiction, horror, and thrillers. And don't forget that I have more videos coming in my Best of the Year playlist. So again, subscribe, check out the rest of the playlist to check out my backlist picks, and keep watching for science fiction and horror, which are definitely coming very soon. Until then, you can help me out by sharing this video around online, giving it a thumbs up, and if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss another video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.